Vogel. It's great to be here, Stephen. Alan Turing called universal a machine that could imitate any other machine and could run any algorithms. So what I thought is, how universal are we humans? We can not only run the algorithms, but we can create those languages and make changes in natural language, create language, translate. We are capable of giving each particular language meaning, purpose, novelty, and justice. So what I'm thinking is, can justice be universal in that sense? For this to work, we would have to have an idea of justice that could work across not only natural language and the kind of dialectic thinking that we have in law, but also in analytic expressions, the axiomatic thinking of the digital world, but also arithmetic, statistics. Now, when we think of justice in this very important field now of artificial intelligence, for instance, we talk about principles such as fairness, accountability, transparency, and principles like that work pretty well in dialectic thinking, but they're complicated to translate to axiomatic thinking. Can an idea of justice be translated into all languages, formal and natural languages? It's a problem of applicability. So I'll face this issue in 3 steps. First, I'll discuss the impossibility of justice in analytic thinking. Then I'll try to understand what a fair algorithm would actually be, and then I'll present the idea of justice as randomness. So justice is usually thought of as a matter of equality and proportion, but equality, in fact, is very hard to identify in the real world, other than for a few industrial objects. But we actually have to choose the features we are looking at to talk about equality. We actually work with proportion in that sense, but what we're doing is actually recognizing differences. And that's what analytic thinking does. And so with that in mind, we can see that human equality is either stipulated or presumed, but it's never just something observable. You have to choose the features to consider some. So it's kind of a feature equality and not complete equality. Now, analytic thinking works with classification, profiling, ranks, and scores. It raises an epistemic problem. And this problem is a problem of justice. It is, when we find regularity, we actually reducing information about things. So we're leaving some features of it unobserved. And when we leave those features unobserved, a part of this process is legitimate. Like, I can check if my TV set is connected to the power source just by looking at the standby light. It's okay. Sometimes there will be error, but it's okay. But then most of the time, we're working with unobservable features, and we are accessing them through proxies. And then we have a problem. The problem of justification of those choices of proxies, because there are alternatives, and sometimes even innovation is made by finding an alternative proxy. So I have the idea of a good student being found by good grades, for instance. Well, you could find a good student by creative talents or emotional intelligence, research projects. And that's where innovation happens, actually. So there's this problem of justifying your choice, not only based on your purpose, the utility that is involved, but also this kind of choice will carry bias and prejudice with it. And this has been much discussed. Feedback loops, like giving more and more credit to people who already have it, and dismissing opportunities and possibilities for other people. Now, when we're judging ourselves, we're the important values probably would be, are talking about people, ethical values, intimate feelings, potential capacities and talents. Those are all unobservable. So when we're judging people, we always judging books by covers. And that's quite visible when we look at studies like the Moore Machine experiment by MIT, when they're considering the behavior of an autonomous vehicle in case of accident. Who should it spare? Who should? So if you think about it, it's quite an absurd kind of thinking. You better kill this or that by age, by gender. But that's the distribution that it shows. And it shows what some authors call structural bias. That's how cultures perceive values and hierarchies. And we need to think about how to neutralize those biases. Though I've seen discussions in the moral machine context saying, oh, we should use those perspectives, cultural perspectives, to program the car. What we rather think is how to neutralize that kind of bias. So I'll use one example. That's this discussion of disparate impact here in the US. And what I see, and I'm very thankful to Sam Corbett-Davis here at Codex, because he talked to me yesterday and told me, helped me discuss the interpretation I had of these articles. But there are two impossibility results, basically, that appear. First is when you find group equality, when you get to group equality, you have to choose. You're actually neutralizing bias by making another choice, because you have to choose the outcome that you want to equalize. And when you equalize one outcome, one statistical outcome, you have imbalanced. You lose the possibility of equality in another outcome. And so this is one impossibility result, and not to mention the loss of efficiency in those processes. And then there's another level of results, that's group equality competing with the recognition of particular differences within groups and in the individual level. So what we get there is, and that we can only make algorithms less unfair. It's very important to say that, because I see websites and people offering algorithms to make things fair. You regulate this outcome, you regulate that outcome, and things will be okay. No, they won't. They only can be made less unfair, because even when you get to the individual level, if we choose to go to the recognition of particular and individual differences, still we have this structural bias in language. And what does that mean? The classification is in some way always biased. Now, this is inherent to language. So here I see it's not a problem in Brazil, but here if you say you live at the 13th floor, it may sound daunting to some people. Now, you say, I live at a high floor, and then the network of ideas it is connected to is perfect line. It's even a sign of status. So you choose the words, and you have an entirely different effect, and that happens in classification, and much of the discussion about the moral machine that's happening has to do with that. Who is the Eastern culture? Who is the Western? Is Brazil in the South or in the West? And there is this kind of discussion. It's uncomfortable, and it is the problem of classification. So what I'm defending here, and I think Amartya Sen had already warned us about this decades ago, is that there is only, for this kind of equality, the only possibility is utility-driven partial fairness, no comprehensive fairness, because you be living features outside. And what I defend here is this is a problem of particular languages. So there are three challenges, I think, to analytic thinking. Of course, in the first step, there are the ill-intended and unaware people who are programming Then there are mathematical impossibilities, and in the third level, there is structural bias, the problem that we can only get to utility-driven fairness. But aren't we universal? So can't we do any better? So I went in search of a fair algorithm, and I found a very unexpected example. Ways. Why? Ways offers us two aspects that I think are contractual. First is the way it establishes equality, and then the utility of it. Utility of Ways is extremely simple. You just agree to it. I want efficiency in traffic. Okay, math there seems to run beautifully. But the important thing is equality. How is it established? I accept to be represented in the system as a bubble car, little bubble car. Okay, now those are simple choices. There are no hidden parties and no hidden utilities. Waze knows it cannot deviate my route to make me pass through a commercial area, for instance. Other systems, other algorithms, they don't seem to know that. Now, if we notice, in both those aspects, equality and utility, there is information reduction, because the utility Waze offers me is not everything that I could want in life. Right. It's just one thing. Right. And equality is established by one feature, just one feature, even very artificial, because I'll be a bubble car, but I consented to it. And philosophically, there's something important there. If you notice, if I choose to be equal, and I choose the feature in which I'm equal, my universality is respected. The fact that I could be anything else, nobody's defining me. I'm accepting to be defined in a certain way in a system. Now imagine how fascinating that is in terms of social systems. Then you will participate. So other than that, other than those two aspects, what we have is the permission of random behavior. And this is beautiful, because you can do anything. I can be in São Paulo 2 days ago and appear here, and no questions are asked. It's all right. Can go in and out and change my path, and it's not a problem. So thinking about a fair system in general, we could think that all information reduction is consented, and other than that, you have randomness. So what if the system offers filters, curatorship, rankings? Is that a problem per se? I don't think so, because those can be and should be consented. We should know that that is happening. In what interests? Curator, who is the curator? Okay, and what are the filters being applied? If we know that, then what we'll have is efficiency in our own choices. So you can have, in the reduction of information, you can have efficiency in your own choice if you consented to it. Now, what does it mean? It means that I'm not giving up. The system is not taking away my options. It's just giving efficiency to a few of them. It's pretty good. It's pretty great. So it ends up the randomness would be the random possibility of behavior, that we preserve that would be the key value. So what would that be? It's the virtual entirety of possibilities with no reduction, randomness. So I've been studying this, and these are my first papers. First has 300 pages, the other has 50. I've been thinking about this because it sounds like a very crazy idea. So I've been studying how would that work in the due process of law, in punitive law, religion, society, conditions to democracy, the results of geometrics. I've been dedicating my life for years for this now. And right now I'll close this presentation just with 3 issues about it. First, I'll say, what exactly is this, and why is it fair? Then, is it universally applicable in the sense of universality that got from Turing? And then a few closing lines. So what is it? The concept of randomness that I'm using is based on Gregory Chaitin conception. And he and his wife, Virginia, they live in Brazil, so they're my friends now. And because, of course, I went after them. And I had to learn directly from the source. So to them, randomness is the entirety of a universe of possibilities. They're thinking life forms. They're talking about the DNA as generative of variety of forms of life. Now, they're talking about life forms. I'm thinking language expressions, language possibilities. And randomness is a phenomenon of language. And it's not arbitrariness. It's not an external criterion that's black boxed in a system. Actually, it's the axiom of systems, irreducible. So it's a logical possibility. Randomness has a rich family of definitions, many authors. It's hard to map. And for my background, I'm having a hard time there. But I already have something. It's the idea of human equality. If we think about us in this way, we're all equal sources of variety to systems. So we are capable of variety. We can change languages. And by changing languages, by making translations, by putting languages in comparison, we can at least discuss biases. So that's our universality. So we are equal in the possibility of radical difference. Maybe we don't have to be equal in features, but we have to be, we can be equal in the possibility of change, of innovation. We are equal in our possibility to change language and change the way language defines ourselves. So justice would be like randomness, equal to randomness, and that's a logical condition. Freedom would be a practical implication. Greg Chaitin, when one of his definitions that can be understood by a person who does not understand coding, he defined randomness in 1975 in a way that I can read it. And what the criterion he uses is quantity of information. He proves randomness by quantity of information. And that's something that every language has. So that's universal. And it's measurable. Now, thinking about applicability, how could we evaluate the justice of a system? I thought of 2 initial questions, and you see some influence of a structure, a Hobbesian structure there. It is, instead of thinking, what does a system offer to us? Because we're always interested in that. We should take a look at what a system or a language takes away from us. How does it reduce our random possibilities? Even when it's bringing possibilities, like websites is bringing me books that I wouldn't have access to, but now what I have to think of, is it depriving me of information about publishers, authors? Even though I'm receiving something, now I have to think, what is it hiding? And then this reduction may be measurable in terms of information. And then the second point is this reduction consented and justifiable to establish equality for the sake of some utility? That's how I'm thinking this can be approached. And so, is it translatable? Well, when Greg Chaitin defined randomness, he defined it in axiomatic terms, but he has explained it in natural language, so we have possibility of working with it dialectically. But then there are other analytic versions. He has equivalents in arithmetics and statistics. So I wonder if this would be really applicable. And of course, there may be competing models, and I don't have the background to evaluate that situation. I'm hoping for collaboration, but I think it is a good candidate for the idea is a good candidate for an idea of justice, the construction of something. So here's my closing lines. I have this personal bet that if we have bigger and bigger data available and being analyzed, we will see how short is the blanket of feature equality. How it is impossible to have comprehensive fairness in analytics. And when I talk about analytics, I'm not just talking about computer systems. I'm talking about traditional analytics, the way like psychiatric diagnoses are composed, for instance, that generate problems in terms of singularity of people. This kind of problem that extends beyond, and I think actually technology will help us understand the kind of problem there is in analytic classification regarding people. And then if it happens, then randomness would become a key concept. So my hope is that this leads to a humanization of judgment instead of a mechanization, because we would notice then when we are deciding mechanically based on protocols of diagnosis or now in those more sophisticated systems, that a human being is necessary behind this, because we're choosing a system, we're choosing classifications, and those could obviously be different, even if not, because they can be the very best we can have, but there's always innovation possible. So large-scale patterns will allow us to overcome the need of utilitarian sacrifices, I think. And why? Because we can have alternative systems. We can find the problems in the choices we've made and create systems to resolve that. So we enhance our creative randomness if our systems are various, concurrent, and optional. Informality being also an alternative. And if we get that, we have a structure in which many kinds of merit criteria will be available. And that's something that I find in the work of Cesar Hidalgo at MIT. So this is what I had to say. Questions, remarks, and collaboration are welcome and much needed. And bibliography is available in a working paper here that I brought for if there was problem in understanding what it said. So that's it. Thank you.
Well, that was amazing.
Wow. Well, thank you for extrapolating what we would normally gloss over, which is this, the language of classification is the art of legal reasoning.
Yes.
And if the foundation of legal reasoning is creating classifications with language that is obscure, with language that is dated, with language that tries to argue by analogy to language that is outdated, then the justice that comes from that classification will be injustice.
So
on the one hand. On the other hand, it will be too brittle to adapt. And it'll be too brittle to adapt to different cultures, to different settings, to different times, and to different media. So I think you've brought forward, a huge piece of work. You're going to be very busy with this.
I hope so.
But it is very profound, and it does call some of the best parts of Stanford and other universities, the philosophy department, the poverty and human rights groups, etc., because it's we do not talk a single language on this campus.
That's great.
Not Portuguese, but thematically. One of the things that I've been doing that relates, and I'm sorry if I'm going on, Roland, but
Please.
so I've been creating a migration storytelling periodic table. How do your ancestors and my ancestors go through journeys that while they are different places and different times and different personalities, there's always a war, there's always religious persecution, there's different property rights for some versus others. So the language by which we would want to talk about commonality in those millennial terms doesn't exist. And in order to understand the empathy of migrants today, we would want to understand the gap in that language, right? So that I could understand the Syrian conflict as the Jewish story of Exodus, etc. So I think you brought forward, in effect, that language is a poor witness in the court system.
That's beautiful.
Right? And that language is betraying the fact pattern that it sometimes wants to describe. So thank
beautiful.
you.
Thank you for putting it in those words. Thank you.
We have a comment online from from Iago. Andrea, when you say that classification is always biased, have you thought, have you thought about individuals or groups, e.g. Brazilian judicial courts, classifies data on their minds and generates the decision as a result of the way the on their mind measures calculates the judgment, as way they measure data and calculates the judgment decision. Do you see it?
Let me see.
Yeah.
I cannot read it here. I think it's always biased.
I think he's typing as he's thinking.
Groups. Yes. I'm thinking about that too. Actually, as I work as a psychoanalyst, that's precisely what I had in mind in the beginning. How are we processing things and naming things? And we always choose to name things a certain way, and we change that. I gave a very simple example. That's the 13th floor of a building or a high floor, but we do that, and I do that in my practice every time someone sits there. Someone went to my office this week and said, "I'm in a middle-age crisis," and I said, "That's a very empty classification of what is happening. I need something else. I need new words for that." And then I realized, well, you have you won in every criteria that you have in each criterion that you have in life. You have won, and now you're in a moment to create your future. You're a very beautiful moment. And then she was. Not a middle-age crisis. Well, I don't know what that means. No,
but in that setting, as the survivor of a marriage to a Freudian psychiatrist, I would suggest that that language is the permission to share an emotion.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So because you can name middle-age crisis, you can share the emotions around that.
Yes.
But if you create a new term, you would not have the same permission to share that emotion. With that emotion would come a judgment for the listener of the ability of that emotion to be valid or not.
Yes. What I think is sometimes you start by something very I think I'm depressed, and then you go and see someone, and then you find your permission, you find your way. But when you get there, you must get something new. Like people get to me and say, "I'm depressed," and I look. I usually say, and that's kind of Well, I would dare to say that here. I tell people I have never met a depressed person in my life, in my work, in 20 years, because everybody came to me saying they were depressed. They were, in fact, very sad about something unresolved from years ago, people they had lost contact, things that they had lost in their lives, and something was needed, something had to be done. And when they start doing and we find what it was, things get so interesting that they throw away their medication. And I said, don't do that. No, don't do that too fast. You have to go to your psychiatrist. But the naming is actually, so I'm answering the question. Naming is very important.
But without that naming, you would be committing professional malpractice to prescribe a drug, psychopharmaceutical drug, that would not be well matched to the classification of depression or schizophrenia or whatever it might be. So you're forced to
Yes.
Until the DSMB comes out with a name.
Yeah, it's a really complicated thing, but we have to start from and
yes.
we are based in analytic thinking. We are working with analytic thinking. And well, my profession has this in name, psychoanalysis. We're called analysts. But then what we see is we work directly with the limits of the possibilities and ethical limits of this, of naming, of language. And what we find beyond that is this kind of randomness of possibilities, is universality, is the possibility of change, of innovation. It's beautiful.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
If I could just make one last comment, something that I took from this was what was fascinating about Waze is when we talk about users, I find in the public we kind of have this connotation of when you say user, it's almost like we should be so lucky to use these applications in a sense. And with Waze, it's almost just like we're a vital part of the ecosystem. It does not exist without us. And when you talked about consenting to being that little blue bubble, and we all know our role and we all know our purpose in the system, is kind of empowering. So I find that even that kind of juxtaposition was just interesting to watch. So thank you for sharing that.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Well, great. Yeah, I think, are we?
I guess this concludes
It's
the meeting.
time.
Thank you
Yeah.
all for your time.
Oh, thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is this?
Yes. I brought just a few because
Yeah, you can post a link to our Facebook page if you like. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because I only have 3 copies. I didn't think that it will raise that much. I can, I can share this.
Yeah, there, you know where our Facebook page is.
Yes,
And
yes.
just post a link and. All right, everybody, we'll see you next week.
See you next week.